Hello, welcome back. It's Christopher Taylor with Sovereign Harmony here for the May update, astrology wise. And you see in front of you, this is the list of the major things going on astrologically in May. And so we're going to go over each little piece, a little bit about what is going on there. And if you have not, do please subscribe to me on Instagram where I do weekly updates. Also on Facebook, you get semi daily updates. And if you haven't seen my latest YouTube webinar on the Saturn and Neptune conjunction, I definitely encourage you to do that. Lots of good information. It is long, 2.5 hours, but you're going to learn a lot, and you can feel free to ask me any questions, etc. But anyway, as we look at May in front of us here, today is April 29th. It's Tuesday, so we got a couple days left of April, and we're heading into this month with the very first topic that we'll talk about that started a few days ago, and it's going to last until about mid-May, and that is the planet Uranus in Taurus, making a sextile to the North Node in Pisces, and that's what we see here. There's Uranus in Taurus, North Node in Pisces, and so we're in this period of kind of gracious change, and we're being encouraged to make changes, even if they're subtle, to just do things a little differently, take a little chance, step out of our comfort zone, because that's the way forward to the future, essentially. If you remember, before we talked about the Saturn-Uranus conjunction, so that's kind of involved here. We'll see that come up here, but that has to do with kind of gradual change, okay, but permanent change as well. Okay, so we're being asked to just kind of listen to our intuition when we're pulled to something different right now. I mean, this could be really a ticket that we might otherwise ignore. And if we take it on, we don't have to take it on, completely or all the way. Like I said, if we just take a step toward it and entertain it, we may find that our direction is helped and adjusted, and that we might look back and say, "Wow, I'm glad I stepped out of my comfort zone there, because this would have never happened." But moving on, next thing on here. So right now, as we speak, all planets, ever since Venus turned direct, right with the full moon in Libra back on April 12th, all planets have been in direct motion. That will end here on May 4th, which is this Sunday coming up, when Pluto turns retrograde. Now, the outer planets, Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, they turn retrograde every year for about almost half the year or so. So it isn't worth digging too deeply into the significance of it, but just to note that the co-rulers of Aquarius are Saturn and Uranus, who are currently in that sextile that I just mentioned, involving the North Node. And the sign of Aquarius has a lot to do with the future, and this has a lot, and the North Node has a lot to do with where we're headed, direction we're headed. And so this just speaks to the idea of this gradual change and shift in society that we're entering here. Okay? And in our personal lives, this is that gradual change that we can embrace as well. In my webinar, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which you can see is on the horizon here, with Saturn there and Neptune there, I talk about Pluto and Aquarius and its role in that as well, in that societal change that we're experiencing, and that we will experience over the next couple of years. The next thing on the docket is the first major lunation of the month, which will be May 12th. That'll be a full moon at 22 degrees Scorpio. And we look at that chart for that. It's a pretty interesting chart. There's the moon, 22 degrees Scorpio, and there's the sun at 22 degrees Taurus. And it's with Uranus in Taurus. And also note that the moon forms the apex point of a yod to both Chiron and Jupiter. So Chiron and Jupiter are forming a sextile to each other. That started back in October. And then we're going to talk about that in the next slide here. We're going to talk about that coming to its conclusion here over the this month here in May. But that's being highlighted by this full moon in a yod fashion. So what's been happening in the background since October with that Chiron Jupiter sextile is we've been basically exploring different options when it comes to who we are and our courage in ourselves, to have faith in ourselves, and to see ourselves as important enough to put first, essentially. And so confronting the self-doubts that come with that, the shadow side of that. And so we've grown a lot since October in terms of our confidence in ourselves, our confidence in what we deserve, our confidence in, the idea that we know what's best for us. Okay, so that's been a lot about what this has been. So this full moon on May 12th is going to be kind of bringing that into fruition, essentially. And you'll see that, in fact, the Jupiter and Chiron come into 1 degree orb right around that same day, I believe. We'll see in the next slide. I think it's within a day or two. And so this really does herald in the conclusion of this growth, growth in our self-confidence, basically, is how you can look at that. And a lot of that growth in our self-confidence has to do with the messages we tell ourselves. Okay, the limits or the lack thereof, for example. And then here I highlighted Mars and Pluto, who are just pulling off their opposition that they've been in since November. I'm pulling that in because the co-rulers of Scorpio are Pluto and Mars. And so we can see that, again, it's kind of heralding in the end of that opposition as well. So there's been a bit of a struggle and, a sense of building our confidence by facing our demons, essentially, all along since the fall, basically. And that this kind of heralds in the culmination of that, like we're finished, we've graduated, essentially. Okay. Then we move into the next thing, which I'm going to clump these two together. So we just mentioned the, you know what? There's a little error in there. Oh, no, there isn't. Yes, there is. Look at that. So there is an error here. So one of these is supposed to be Jupiter squaring the nodes. This one's correct. This is supposed to be Jupiter squaring Chiron. Okay, I'm not going to fix it. We're just going to pretend that's Chiron right there because we'll see it on the slide next. But you can see right there, full moon, the 12th, and then boom, that sextile to Chiron, it comes back into 1 degree orb on the 12th. And then for a couple of weeks, that'll be, phasing out essentially again because we've graduated. And then a new aspect is the Jupiter squaring nodes. So Jupiter is now in, late Gemini, squaring those nodes in late Pisces. So North Node, late Pisces, South Node, late Virgo. And that's roughly the same period of time that this is phasing out. And so on the next slide, we'll show kind of both of those at once. There's Jupiter in Gemini. It's squaring the nodes. It's not sextiling the nodes. It's squaring them. And it is sextiling Chiron, like we said. And so this just kind of speaks to kind of like passing the baton, essentially. So after we built our confidence since October, that's been building, right? And the messages we tell ourselves, et cetera, a lot of growth in our self-confidence. And now we're kind of passing the baton to this like kind of decision-making point. Are we going to get pulled back into the Virgo energy of thinking it, overthinking things, essentially, worrying too much about the details, self-criticism, all of that, or we're going to move toward faith. We're going to move toward trust. We're going to move toward our intuition leading the way versus, critical logic, essentially. And so that Jupiter, without having that sextile to Chiron in Aries for the last many months, 6 or 7 months, we might not be in a position to make the right choice for ourselves. But now here we are and this was what, May 15th to the 22nd. So for about a week, May 15th to the 22nd, now this is a decision-making time, pretty strong decision-making time, but we can be confident in ourselves to make the right decision, to move toward the future, which means trusting the unknown rather than sticking to our habits and our plans and our things that we laid out in detail and whatnot. So it's kind of trusting our ability to move forward without all of the details, basically. Okay. Next thing on the list, this is an interesting one. So Venus trining Mars, it'll be in the 1 degree orb for about 5 days from May 19th to the 24th. And that'll be Venus will be at 16 degrees Aries, Mars at 16 degrees Leo. Okay, we'll see that in the next slide. So there they are. So that's 15, 59, roughly 16 degrees. Okay, that when they make they're trine to each other. And so this is a dance essentially, between the two planets of creativity. When they come together, kind of masculine and the feminine, the yin and the yang. It really has to do with creation. Now these two met with each other in early Aquarius back in late February of 2024. So 15 months ago, this cycle started. This current Venus-Mars cycle started, and they made their square to each other in late August. And then they opposed each other in mid-December, just after Mars turned retrograde in December. Okay, and then right as Venus turned retrograde on March 1st, that Mars and Venus were almost close enough to be considered a square. They didn't make an exact square to each other, but they were within several degrees of a square. And so again, it's kind of like this dance has been going on. One goes retrograde while they're in an opposition, and then the other one goes retrograde when they're close to a square. And now we're coming into this kind of smooth flow in fire signs. So both Mars and Venus have gone through a pretty good review period. So internally, in terms of our actions, in terms of our hearts and where our hearts lie and what we value, our relationships, money, things like that. A lot of things have been on hold these last several months. Going back to that Jupiter sextile Chiron, where we're building our confidence and whatnot. And so these personal planets had like really no clear direction. There was no clarity in terms of where to direct them. And so we could have felt creatively stifled over the last many months. When it comes to relationships, there could be, stagnation and inability to kind of like really figure out how to move things forward and whatnot. But with this smooth trine of Venus Mars for that week from May 15th to from May 22nd to, or what was, I can't remember. May 19th to the 24th, sorry. So about that 5-day period there, just as the sun is going to be entering Gemini, essentially, they're going to form that trine. And so, mid to late May is this real sense of flowing forward. And that goes in line with the idea of that, that sextile between Jupiter and Chiron being over, and Jupiter squaring the nodes. And that kind of, when Jupiter's done squaring the nodes, that's pretty much when this is happening. Okay. And so we're making that decision. We're making that decision to move forward to the future. And we have the wind at our backs, essentially, with the Mars Venus. So when it comes to creations, when it comes to relationships, when it comes to, knowing where to channel our energy and just going for it, from those fire signs, that's really what we're looking at in May. So this is a culmination in general of what we've just been dealing with since around October, November. Okay. Some deep things we had to go into, we had to review, and now we're really heading to this more of like forward direction kind of period. And then right as Venus trine Mars, right as that's starting to break up on May 24th, we have Saturn entering Aries. Okay. So we know Neptune just entered Aries on March 30th. Okay. Not the first time in our lifetime. Now Saturn, it's like once every 29 years or so. So Saturn was in Aries back in the late 90s. Was the last time Saturn was in Aries. So it's been a while for sure. But that really signifies self-responsibility in a lot of ways. Okay. So really putting the emphasis on ourselves, as far as our thoughts, our emotions and whatnot, and less about a victim mentality. Like, what's being thrown at me? What do I have to just react to or whatnot? Okay. And since since Mars is the ruler of Aries, and Saturn just enters Aries, I threw in that Mars Venus trine in there to show you that that's still in play. It's starting to pull apart at this point, but it's still in play. And so this really speaks to the idea again of like grabbing the reins of our creativity, right? If the last many months have really like had us feeling like we're being held back, it's not quite the right time, quote unquote, with anything going on in our lives. This is like saying, just take responsibility for it and do it, right? That's really what it comes down to. It's like the Nike slogan, just do it. And it's no more excuses kind of energy, right? And so again, that just speaks to the idea of it being time to move forward finally. And then finally on here, we have the May 26th new moon in Gemini. And what you'll see there is that there's a new moon there, and it's going to bring in Mercury in Gemini, which is going to be forming a sextile to basically Saturn and Neptune in Aries, which again, that now they're both in Aries. So from the bigger picture perspective, we're building toward that Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries that will be exact at 0 degrees Aries in February of 2026. This is exactly what my webinar was all about. And again, I do encourage you to watch that if you haven't yet. Watch it in pieces, whatever you got to do. Watch it double time. But lots of good info so to understand that this, every time Saturn and Neptune join each other, it's a big, big deal in terms of societal evolution. Okay. We're currently in the process of ending the cycle, the most recent cycle that started in Capricorn back in 1989. Okay. So these don't happen very often. And it's very important to understand what's going on there. So the idea being this new moon is going to be kind of, whereas the full moon was kind of a culmination and an ending, a threshold essentially of moving from the stagnant energy of the many months to a more forward energy. And now this is the birth, essentially, this gentle nudge pulling in this Saturn-Neptune, this conjunction that's not going to be quite exact again until February. But all the energy for it is building. All the repercussions in society that it implies are building. Okay, and so I see this new moon as kind of just the beginnings of the new way of the world, which we won't be living in until next year, but we're going to start seeing it build. So, like, for example, things like, the media is jumping up at me right now because a big thing that just represents the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries, in my opinion, is when it comes to media, the idea that there's a transition happening away from mainstream corporate media and toward independent media. Okay, we've been seeing that happen over the last several years, but we're going to really see where the ratings get to the point where there's no point in paying someone to spew the news, which isn't news anymore. It's just propaganda. And then when you get rid of that, what does that leave you with? Okay, and I talk about this in my webinar, so I do encourage you to look at that. But I think we're going to see this summer, as both Saturn and Neptune are in Aries for most of the summer, it's going to be this prelude to this, and this idea that the information that you get can be of higher value and more reliable from independent sources if you can use your own intuition and your own discernment to figure out what is true and what isn't, rather than them telling you through corporate news what is true and what you shouldn't believe, etc. So we're going to just see a building of that, and a lot of that Jupiter sextile Chiron on a collective level really had to do with that. So since about October, November, so this is the U.S. election essentially, is a lot of people are waking up to this idea that the corporate news is lying very often, and that you can actually piece together what's true if you use your own discernment, and get your information from different sources essentially. So anyway, that wraps it up for May. Thank you for joining me. If you have any questions, do ask down below. Please share with anyone you think will like this. Like, share, and subscribe if you have not already. And again, I encourage you to follow my Instagram, which is just going to be Sovereign Harmony Astrology, for weekly updates, and follow me on Facebook, Sovereign Harmony Astrology, for semi-daily updates. And again, take a look at that webinar if you can. All right, we'll see you next time. Thanks for stopping by, and take care.